Welcome back to Las Vegas Black Hat 2023. I'm Jeff Mann, one of the co-hosts of Paul's Security Weekly, and I'm sitting here this afternoon with Karim Toubba, who is the CEO of a company called LastPass. Karim, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Hey, just to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, CEO of LastPass, been here a little over a year, and spent, 24 out of the last 26 years, as we were talking about earlier, in and around cyber.
Sure.
One of the most interesting and dynamic spaces. And prior to that, I was CEO of a company called Kenna Security, which was in the risk-based vulnerability management space.
Yep.
That was acquired by Cisco, and then spent time at companies doing crypto, spent time most of my career in and around the product world.
Great.
Yep.
And a year at LastPass.
Yep.
Interesting timing.
It is interesting timing indeed.
Well, welcome to the jungle.
Thank you. It's always fun to be here.
How are things been, let's say, for the last 6 months at LastPass?
Yeah, good. We've, obviously had an initial incident that the market was well aware of a couple of months after I came on board, but we've been doing a lot of work since then, including releasing and building some capabilities to not just shore up defenses, but more importantly, or just as importantly, really starting to make investments in and around Passwordless, which really enables organizations and individuals to start thinking about what does the journey look like as I start to use that factor that not a lot of people had used historically in the world of something you are, something you have, something you know.
Right.
How do you start to use the something you are a little bit more, like biometrics and other mechanisms?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, on our news segment back, December, we certainly talked about the news of LastPass. And it got me thinking, because I have a cryptographic background and very familiar with something you have, something you know, something you are, and also have been doing PCI forever where that's a requirement.
Yep.
It occurred to me that people that use password vaults, that's no longer something you know.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, how many clients do I have where they don't even know their passwords? So they're technically not meeting the requirement of multi-factor authentication, which is a PCI requirement.
Yeah.
And that sort of spun me off on a little research project. It was the holidays, and it was a squirrel that I chased for a while, but it made me realize that I'm not a big advocate that this industry is constantly evolving and constantly changing. The technology certainly is, but the idea of MFA, this thing that we all know, this mantra, has only been around less than 20 years.
Yeah.
2004 is the first time I've seen it in a published NIST document.
Yeah.
And it's kind of time to rethink the whole thing, which I think is what we're going to talk about. To start, though, I love to, when we have a conversation about topics, just to make sure that everybody's at least somewhat familiar with what we're talking about. So could you give just a brief description of what it is you're talking about when you say passwordless?
Yeah, sure. So look, if you look at the sort of prototypical authentication paradigm, right? You and I went to a site or a service. We created an account, we put in a username and a password.
Right.
Those username and passwords got sent to the third party. They
Right.
stored it, encrypt it, do all the security around it.
Hopefully.
And hopefully, so you would hope.
Right.
And then from there, I would use those two components or credentials to authenticate myself routinely from any device. And so there's a lot of benefit to that. In theory, as we all matured, you would start to create better practices and hygiene around, random, unique,
Right.
long, strong, hopefully things that aren't susceptible to brute force passwords. But that becomes hard to remember when I have, over 200 logins across different services.
But in the beginning, there was only one.
But in the beginning, there was only one, right? And it's
There
a much
can
more
be
complex
only one.
world.
Yeah.
A much more complex world.
Yep.
But the idea of, and of course with those came all sorts of threat vectors, but the idea of passwordless is that we all have things like our face, biometric mechanisms, fingerprints, things of that nature. And the world has moved on enough that whether you're talking about a device like a desktop that has fingerprint ID on it,
Right.
A device like your smartphone that has either Face ID or Touch ID enabled, or even third-party devices like Phaeton or YubiKeys, things of that nature, most of which most people don't have, but certainly most people have laptops and smartphones. You can actually, in fact, use the biometrics as an authentication means into a service instead of the username and password. And that's, at a high level, that's what Passwordless is about. Now, there's a lot of technology on the back end. It just so also happens to be that the technology behind Passwordless uses something called passkeys, which basically uses public-private key pairs and digital signatures that make it unique, much stronger, and takes out a whole category of potential attack vectors that security and IT administrators are constantly running around trying to scramble to defend against.
So at the risk of oversimplifying, Passwordless is simply something other than the something you know.
Correct. It's something you are.
Something you are.
Correct.
Interesting, in my research, in I forget the years of the earliest writings about it, and of course I came from the National Security Agency, and we used to be the authoritative source for all this stuff, and it shifted to NIST because NIST was in the unclassified world, and we couldn't talk about the things we did. But the early mentions of multiple forms of authentication, even from the very beginning, I think everybody acknowledged passwords are not a great idea, but it's what we had to start with.
Yep.
And the mecca 20, 25 years ago was biometrics, but at the time there wasn't technology there to make it scalable and economically feasible.
To roll out hardware.
To roll it out.
Yep.
The sort of the initial fallback was a lot of NSA, what appeared to be NSA-driven ideas of some sort of cryptographic token.
Yep.
You know, remember a dongle?
Yep. Oh yeah. It was on the side of my belt. You used to pull it card with X509 certificates that you put on.
Or the RSA, you know, key fob, that
RSA,
type of thing.
Yeah, of course.
And that was in, I forget which 800 series it was, but there was a draft version where I first saw the something you have, something you are, something you know. But really you should be using a cryptographic something. By the time it was published, and it was only a couple months later, it was something you have, something you know, something you are, and that cryptographic thing had kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
I haven't done the research to find out what was the politics involved there. But, okay, I'm more comfortable now with the definition of passwordless. Talk to me a little bit about what are some of the other things that are out there these days beside, throw away the something you know.
Yeah.
What's the next best option, and is there still a need for, is more than one better than just one?
Yeah, I mean, look, multi-factor in its construct is actually quite a good idea and has been. It's not just technically sound, but it provides another layer of security and capability, right? Because what do we know, having been in security forever? There's never a single solution. There's a constant evolution from an attacker perspective. And so, you know, attackers are super smart. They eventually find ways to get around the technologies that we all build and deploy. And so this idea of multi-factor just makes the bar to pop a user higher, which I think inherently is very good. I think that the real thing we have to think about is the usability of it, right? There's always this tension, especially inside of organizations, between practicality / usability versus security. Right. I mean, how many times have you been inside a room making that argument?
Let's call it what it is. Convenience.
Convenience. That's exactly.
And ultimately, it's not convenience. It's the cost.
It's the cost. Yeah.
In terms of the time it takes.
Yeah.
The lost productivity.
That's
and
right.
things like
That's
that.
right.
So
That's
it's
right.
all dollars.
But it's also the familiarity of it, right?
Sure.
I mean, the world in and out of work has been. Those lines have been completely erased now, and so you know, and I'm logging in a bunch of things, working on a bunch of devices, accessing a bunch of applications, and the lines are blurred. And so you want something that is familiar to users, because if you think about security and IT teams, what they predominantly want is something that is ubiquitous and that they know they're going to have a high adoption rate, and there isn't a huge amount of training to be done. So things that are multi-factor, you know, whether you're using Duo technology or whatever technology, just, you know, even if it's got some geo component next to it that gives you an additional layer of security, is generally a good idea, matched with the capability to go passwordless. So if you can combine those things, then you're not only adding an additional layer of security, but you're really, again, removing yet another class of potential attacks against the user.
So kind of the obvious question for me is LastPass, Password Vault, something well, in theory, it was the something
You know,
piece.
now it's something you have.
And now it's something you have.
That's right.
So what are you guys doing that's passwordless?
Yeah. So one thing to remember before getting on to that is that these transitions take forever,
Sure.
right? I mean, we talked about how long MFA's been around. Walk around the organization and ask people how many people have actually deployed MFA, right?
Mm-hmm.
SSO is another technology. It's been around for 10 plus
I do
years.
PCI, everybody.
Well, there you go. I mean, SSO has been around for a decade plus. Not every enterprise app is SSO
Sure.
enabled yet, right?
Sure.
So these transitions will take a while, and therein lies, I think, both the challenge but also the opportunity, because what sort of our view and our approach is, look, we're not going to wake up tomorrow morning with every application being password enabled. By the way, when I want to create a passwordless environment, yes, I have to do some things, create passkeys on the user side and create the right experience. I also have to inject some code into the application to make it password enabled. So there's a server side, app side, code work, and then there's the client side work. So these transitions will take years.
Right.
And so the question then becomes, and which sort of led to our approach after research, is to say, look, we want to create a passwordless experience to the user. So I want to be able to access my vault in a passwordless way, in a variety of passwordless ways, meaning that I want to use biometrics from my phone. I want to use a third-party device like Phaeton or YubiKey for the organizations that really want to sort of desegregate that. Okay. Today, we announced full FIDO2 compatible support for any FIDO2 devices, including YubiKeys, but smartphones and others. Okay. And that will give us the opportunity to allow users to have biometric and passwordless access to the vault, and then store passkeys inside of their vault if they're accessing a site that supports passwordless, or secure usernames and passwords inside of the vault, and let the vault determine what the backend needs. But to me as a user, I still experience a passwordless experience to the vault.
Gotcha. So yeah, I see the need for the transition, and in some ways cutting edge today, but 3 years from now, you'll look back and think, wow, that was really primitive how we did that.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Gotcha.
And you know, one of the best things that we can do as an industry, I think, is make these more complex, somewhat technical transitions transparent to the user.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the more we can all succeed, and that's not always an easy thing to do, but the more we can do that, the broader, the better we'll have at that conversation of that whole convenience versus security, right?
Yeah, and that's been a goal, probably one of the most daunting holy grails of our industry from the very beginning.
That's
is
right.
To make the security transparent. Unfortunately, there's a lot of users out there that think there's transparent security in place where there isn't necessarily.
Yeah.
But somebody's surely got it covered. I wouldn't be able to do this. Somebody's got to be watching.
That's
it's
right.
somebody else's problem.
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Any sort of last word, messages you want to get out to our audience?
Yeah. You know, I think that, you know, like many of these transitions that have occurred, you know, over the last 10, 20 years in tech in general, but in security specifically, there are always sort of key investments that have to be made up front. But you know, you sort of got to have staying power, and you got to have a clear strategy. And passwordless is a classic example of that. When you think about passwordless, and as I talk to organizations about this, they have to think about it in sort of multiple lenses, right? If you think about it pretty simply, I've got things that I access that are applications.
Right.
I've got things that I access that are systems, and I've got things that I access that are infrastructure. So I may be accessing VPN infrastructure. I may be accessing my laptop, desktop.
Right.
I may be accessing my CRM app if I'm a sales rep inside of an organization. And I think organizations have to think about each and every element, because the promise of password on the technical side, the reduction of the attack surface, the removal of certain attack vectors is clear.
Right.
But on the user side is the more you can think about it as a journey that addresses each one of those domains, if you will,
Right.
the more you're going to have success in getting users to adopt and have a uniform experience.
Right. So you're sort of in that early adoption evangelism, get the message out, get people to start thinking differently about it.
Correct.
And ease us into it.
Ease us into it. And then think about how you can, you know, because I'd love a passwordless experience to all of my personal applications as well, right?
Great. Well, that's all the time we have for
All
it.
right.
Thanks, Kareem. We could have gone on for hours. Check out securityweekly.com, LastPass BH for more information.